At the end of the overview, and we want to talk some more about New Testament times and the New Testament. Now, a little bit of review. Paul was a Pharisee after a Pharisee of the Jews. One of the sects, the major sects of the Jews at that time were Pharisees and Sadducees. The Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection, but the Pharisees did. Paul used this information that he had about these sects when he was brought before the council or the Sanhedrin and brought before authorities that could enforce his death or enforce the taking of his life. He knew that there was some differences. Some of them believed in the resurrection and some didn't. And he would carefully play on that like a lawyer would. Paul seems to have been educated much like we'd say a lawyer is nowadays. Of course, he really knew this old law, if you want to call that the old law, the Mosaic law. Then he was educated along that line. He was a very conscientious man. He studied, or he was educated at the feet of Gamaliel, and Gamaliel was a recognized authority among the Jews at that time. Although probably a young man, he was given authority by this ruling council of the Jews to go to Damascus and bring back in bonds these people who were followers of Christ. Some of them were being killed. You might remember that the first Christian martyr, a person that gave his life that we have a record of in the New Testament, was who? Stephen. All right. There was a young man holding the cloaks, or the clothing, some of the outer garments that would hinder them from throwing rocks, holding these articles of clothing. His name was Saul, who would later become known as Paul. And it's strange about this man. Truly, he was an enemy of Christ and his followers, but Christ picked him to do a special job for him. And he confronted him in the 9th chapter of Acts, when he had asked Christ, who art thou, and so on, and he was told. And Christ asked him, why do you persecute me? Why persecutest thou me? And he was struck blind, and some will say, well, he was converted on the road to Damascus. He was not converted on the road to Damascus, because conversion means from a non-Christian to a Christian, or from a follower of Christ to a follower of Christ. So that didn't happen until he got into Damascus. And there, a man by the name of Ananias came to him, because God had instructed Ananias to go to him. And Ananias told him, now why tarriest thou? Arise and be baptized, washing away thy sins. So that's when he was converted. All right. Let's find where Acts 9, where this confrontation took place of Paul. All right, follow me. But Saul, that was his name, before being called Paul, yet breathing threatening and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, went unto the high priest. See, that would be the high priest of the ruling council of the Jews, the Sanhedrin, and asked him letters. He had authority written to Damascus unto the synagogues, and if he found any that were of the way, that way is capital. That means that those people that were of this new way that followed Christ, whether men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. And he journeyed, as he journeyed, came to pass that he drew nigh unto Damascus, and suddenly there shone round about him a light out of the heaven. And he fell upon the earth, and heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he said, Who art thou, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus, whom thou persecutest. But rise and enter into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do. See, that's the reason why I insisted he was not converted here. He certainly got his attention, so he told him to go to the city, and that's where he'd find out what he'd got to do. And the men that journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing the voice, but beholding no man. And Saul arose from the earth, and when his eyes were opened, he saw nothing. And they led him by the hand, and brought him into Damascus. And he was 3 days without sight, and did neither eat nor drink. Now there was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias, and the Lord said unto him in a vision, Ananias? And he said, Behold, I am here, Lord. And the Lord said unto him, Arise and go to the street which is called Straight, and inquire at the house of Judas for one named Saul, a man of Tarsus. For behold, he prayeth, and he hath seen a man named Ananias coming in, and laying his hands on him, that he might receive his sight. But Ananias answered, Lord, I've heard many things of this man. In other words, Ananias is afraid. Now look what he said. Lord, I'm afraid of this man. How much evil he did to thy saints in Jerusalem. In other words, he's been an instrument of evil against the cause of Christ. And here he hath authority from the chief priest to bind all that call upon thy name, and all that profess the name of Jesus Christ. You know, I told you that if you become a Christian, you must confess that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Well, you see what happened in those days. They could be bound and carried before the Sanhedrin and condemned. But the Lord said unto him, Go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel. In other words, the Lord's chosen this man to bear my name before the Gentiles. Now, he's been a devout Jew, probably a member of the Sanhedrin, but now God says, I'm going to use that man. And he did. And he'll go before kings and the children of Israel. And look at here. Now, this man's been going around persecuting those people who follow me. Look what I'll do to him. For I will show him how many things he must suffer for my name's sake. Paul suffered indeed for the name of Christ. He was left dead at one time from stoning, yet he did not die. They thought he was dead. He was shipwrecked. And there's a whole list of things named over in one of the letters as to the things that Paul went through. Well, God here said that he's going to show him those things he must suffer for his name's sake. So that's the background of this man named Paul. And Paul is responsible for all of the Pauline epistles, we call them. The letters written by Paul, they go all the way through to almost the back end of the New Testament, all the way through to Hebrews. And then after that, of course, there's the Epistle of James and the Epistle of Jude and the Epistles of John. But all those others were written by Paul. And they concerned his travelings around the Mediterranean area, mostly around through Turkey and Greece. Now, Paul made, and it is recorded in the book of Acts, 3 different journeys. Paul's first missionary journey is marked with these little black arrow-like things on this map. His second missionary journeys look like little pluses. and up in through here. The third missionary journey is solid red. And then the voyage, when he asked to be heard before the highest authority in Rome, he went by ship over to here, over to Rome. And there's where he died, in Rome. Although the Bible does not have an account of his death, the history does. Now, Paul operated out from this church right here at Antioch. Antioch sent he and Barnabas, along with a nephew of Barnabas, on that first missionary journey. What was that nephew's name? Do any of you remember? John Mark, the one who wrote the book of Mark. Now, John Mark was a nephew of Barnabas, like I said. And Mark went with them. They left here and they went over to Cyprus, went across this island. They came up here to Pamphylia in Pisidia, and Paul and Barnabas traveled on over and through here, up through Antioch of Phrygia, or Antioch in Pisidia, I guess it is, yeah, Antioch in Pisidia, and Iconium and Derbe, and then back. But it's kind of like going out on a trip. One of my older brothers one time, when they were young men in the late 20s or the early 30s, I guess it was, and an uncle of his who was about the same age left the country home there in Middle Tennessee, and they said, we're going to get on our thumb and go out and see the world. Well, my brother got as far as Chattanooga. That's about 200 miles away, and my uncle was going all the way to the coast, to the Atlantic coast, and he went on. My brother said, I got tired of that. So that kind of reminds you of what might have happened here with John Mark. You might say he chickened out right here and went back. John Mark did. Later on in the letters, we see that Paul respected John Mark because Paul didn't like it. All right, they came back. Paul and Barnabas came back to the church at Antioch here, and they gave a report, much like you see reports in here when we have people come back from Singapore and places like that. They gave a report of their journey, and they got ready to go out again on this second missionary journey, which would be this little plus line signs here. And Paul and Barnabas had somewhat of a falling out. And you don't learn a whole lot of it from the Bible other than they did not agree. That's the way it was. They didn't agree because that nephew of yours, Barnabas, he chickened out on us last time. I'm supplying some words that's not there. But Barnabas went one way and Saul or Paul went another. So that's just one of the events that happened to a couple of people in working with the early church there. Paul went, this time he went by land up in through here, where he, pretty close to where he was born and raised, and he went through the edge of Cappadocia here and over to Laconia and into Phrygia. And the Bible says that he would have gone up into Galatia, but the Holy Spirit wouldn't allow him. Told him to go over here. And he went over to Troas. This is pretty close to the Aegean Sea, and here is Greece over in here. Only Greece was just this part down in here, and they call that Macedonia part. A lot of this is just Greece now. And there he got what we call the Macedonian call. You go over into Macedonia or into Greece. So if I ask you, on what missionary journey did the gospel first go into Europe? That's it. The second missionary journey. Here's the dividing line between Asia and Europe. Right in through here. This is now Istanbul. It was later, before that, Constantinople. and the Black Sea here, and then this sea in through here. Asia back here, Europe over there. So Paul, on his second missionary journey, went over into Europe. He went through here establishing churches or baptizing people. Right here at Philippi is where he met the woman, the seller of purple, Lydia. She was from off over here. She was a sales lady. She was from off over here around Thyatira in Turkey or in Asia Minor. But she was over here selling goods, and he converted she and her household. That's at Philippi. He had problems at Philippi. He had gone through Neapolis, and he went down to Amphipolis, and he had problems along in these areas. Oftentimes he'd have to run out to escape. People stir up problems with him because they knew he was teaching this new system, and the Jews particularly didn't like it. He went through Thessalonica. You recognize there, that's two letters were written to the Thessalonians. And the Philippi, that's the letters written to the Philippians. All right. He went down through Berea and then down to Athens, the center of cultural living in a lot of ways still. Even though Rome was the major political power, there was still a lot of respect for this city of Athens, because the Greek kingdom before Christ came upon the earth was a dominant kingdom in those areas. They had conquered everything. But the Greeks had offered to our Western civilization art, literature, and the appreciation of beauty with their structures and so on, and their literature. So that was a center of learning, Athens was. Yet they had all sorts of false gods and all sorts of beliefs, but they were what we would call, I guess nowadays, liberal thinkers. Anybody wants to come along and tell us something, we'll listen. Our minds are open to anything. They'll swallow anything, just about it. Paul, on this second missionary journey then, as he walked along, he gets on a soapbox. We might call it a soapbox. There was a place in the center of of Athens, called the Areopagus, or a forum. A lot of ancient cities had these. It meant that rather than get on the street corner like you see somebody preaching nowadays or just making a speech, they tell me that in the park in New York City, there's people that just get up there and start making a speech. In some places, people gather around and listen to them. And in Los Angeles, there's a park there where people do the same thing. Well, these people were always looking for something new. There were the Epicureans and the Stoics in this city of renown. The Epicureans believed in eat, drink, and be merry, and the Stoics were rather somber type of philosophy. You ought to be careful going through this life and so on. You shouldn't even so much as smile and things like that. But they were always looking for something new. So Paul came through here, and as he walked along and observed their objects of worship, he saw also an altar. He saw many altars. Let's say the goddess of love, the goddess of war, the goddess of peace, the goddess of this, that, and the other, or the god of this, and so on. You look at some of Greek ancient mythology and ancient history, and you'll find a lot of the names of these people. I married one. One of the names was Iris, for instance. Forget what the goddess or something. But at any rate, as they walked along, he did, and saw all of these statues. That's all there was. They had a bunch of statues, and they worshiped these things, worshiped these people. He said, I saw the one with the inscription to an unknown God. I said, this is the one I'm going to talk to you about. This is the God that made the earth and all things therein. And he's not made with hands like these others around here. He does not need to be worshipped by men in that fashion. because he made all things himself. That's where he introduced Christ and God to that society. If you ever wonder, well, how would I approach somebody who doesn't even believe in God? Go to Acts, the 17th chapter, and study Paul's sermon on Mars Hill. That Mars Hill would be that forum, or Paul's sermon at the Areopagus. In fact, the American Standard uses the word Areopagus instead of Mars Hill. And Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and made his speech. And he told them that who God was. God made all things. And then he told them that God had a son, and that God, this Son of God, would judge everybody in the hereafter. And he told them we're all of one blood. And this sometimes angers people who say that, for instance, those black folks out there, they're not even human. You mean I'm the same blood as they are? Yeah, you are. Same blood as black and purple or whatever. I call those people over in India purple because they look, their skin's almost purple. Some of those colors over in there, and the yellow race, Chinese, and so on. We're all of one blood. We can mix. You can go over there. If you'd gone over into China and picked a yellow wife instead of a white one, you would have raised children by them because your blood mixes. And we're all of one blood. That particular message that Paul gives there tells us. After he made that speech, some believed. Others just scoffed at him and went away. Well, that's the way it is nowadays. Some will believe the truth and some will just walk away. Some said, we'll hear him again sometime. He went on down into Corinth, and you recognize that, the letters written to the Corinthians. Corinth was a great seaport. And this was a great sea and a lot of trade coming in and out of here. And to be around a bunch of sailors was no different then than it is now. Well, it might have been worse if you look at it in one way. But that's the type of a place this was. Rowdy, bawdy, all sorts of things going on at Corinth. And he went to the synagogue there to contact the Jews, and he first always went to the Jews, trying to convert them. And he had some success. The church was established in Corinth. They had some problems, of course. This is the place here, and also back over here at Ephesus, where he encountered religious beliefs that even incorporated the sex act as a part of religion in those days. They had priestesses who served as what we would nowadays call religious harlots. All right. There, by the way, this is not unknown in our time. In the San Francisco area, I believe there's a Church of the Devil or something like that, Church of Satan, in which, according to what I can read the last 15, 20 years, there are women who are believers in that who serve as religious holders, as a religious act. All right. He went back down here, and the third, he went back here. He did come down here and then go back to Antioch. And the third journey, again, was this solid line. He retraced some of the same steps, and on that third missionary journey, when he was coming back, we find in Acts 20 and 28, he came back to Miletus, right along in here, a seaport, and there he called the elders down from Ephesus to come down and meet him. And Acts 20:28, will someone turn to that for me? Acts 20:28, see what he told those elders there. Paul was inspired of God to write these things. Have you found it? Read it.
Therefore take heed to yourselves and to all the flock among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers to shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood.
telling them, you look after, and he goes ahead and says, because after my departure, men will enter in, even from among you, who will carry away or lead off disciples in apostasy and so on. He's telling those folks to take heed, you take care of things. And he called it the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood. Now God the Father didn't die on the cross, did he? God the Son did. So that's the meaning there. God the Son died on the cross. He shed his blood, and what did he buy with that blood? He bought the church. Christ bought the church. He tells the elders here at Ephesus. He went on back and then went back down to Jerusalem, and the fourth journey was not necessarily a journey. It was riding a ship back to Rome. And at one point the ship was overcome by waves and so on, and he was shipwrecked. You remember one of them got bit by a snake, and Paul healed that person. So that introduces this man who has a major part of the New Testament. Now, of course, we'll study later on all of those things, teachings in the New Testament, but this man named Paul was the one who spread this throughout all this area. And he wound up a prisoner over here in Rome, where he died in Rome, or was killed by the Roman authorities. I believe it was under Nero, and I'd have to check that for certain, but one of the Caesars there. All right. Realizing now that that's the background of the New Testament, then I'd again like to go through some of these things with you here. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote the 4 accounts of the life of Christ. Matthew was a publican. Now, a publican was a person in this area who cooperated with Roman authorities to collect taxes. In today's terms, you would call John R. Jones Jr., I believe it is the one who took over that job downtown in Pensacola, a publican, collect taxes. No, does he assess or collect them? At any rate, Matt Langley Bell, or one of those, tax collector. Now, publicans didn't have a good reputation because the Roman authorities knew under their system that they had in those days that you go out and you collect as much taxes as you can, and they realized that they wasn't going to get everything that man collected. He pocketed a lot of it. Sounds like politicians nowadays. He pocketed a lot of it, and so therefore publicans were sometimes spoken of in the same terms as publicans and sinners, for instance. Well, Matthew was converted out of that kind of a background. Mark was the nephew of Barnabas. He wrote what we call the abbreviated gospel, the shortest one of the 4. Matthew and Luke are both long. They give us the background of Christ, the genealogy, the one from the standpoint of Mary and the other standpoint of Joseph. And they are longer accounts of Christ's life. Luke is the longest. Luke was a doctor, a medical doctor, physician. Luke attended or went with Paul on some of these missionary journeys. Luke, the physician, went with Paul on some of these missionary journeys. All right, John was an apostle, fisherman, and he wrote a gospel that was not the shortest, but it wasn't as long as Matthew and Luke. The Acts of the Apostles was also written by Luke, written by Luke because it was addressed to the same person as was Luke. It was addressed to Theophilus, both Luke and Acts. Okay, the rest of these are letters except for the book of Revelation on the end. We'll have to quit. Mark, That we call, he was the nephew of Barnabas. John Mark, he wrote the abbreviated gospel, the shortest of the four.